Hello, my name is Afshin Marashi, and I'm the director of the Farzaneh Family Center for Iranian and Persian Gulf Studies here at the University of Oklahoma. And on behalf of everyone here at the center and at the university, I'd like to welcome you to the OU Iranian Studies podcast. This is our second episode of the podcast, and since we're still getting started, I thought it might be a good idea to say something about how we envision the goals of the OU Iranian Studies podcast. Our primary goal is to publicize the research that is being produced in the field of Iranian studies with an emphasis on work that is sponsored, engaged with, or otherwise created in collaboration with Iranian studies faculty here at OU. We have an active Iranian studies faculty here, all of whom are engaged in research, and part of the goal of the podcast is really to put OU on the map in the field of Iranian studies. And related to that, we also hope to use the podcast to record conversations with visiting scholars who come to OU to give talks in the field of Iranian studies, and we also have a rather active visiting scholar program that is sponsored by OU's Farzaneh Center. And we'd like to give both local listeners and everyone on the web who might not be able to attend our on-campus talks a chance to hear from some of our visiting speakers. So that's also one of our goals. So for this, our second episode of the podcast, we are very honored to have with us today Professor Lior Sternfeld of Penn State University's History Department and the History and Jewish Studies program at Penn State. Lior, welcome to the OU Iranian Studies podcast.
Thank you, Afshin. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, well, we're glad that you made it. We're very happy to have you here in Norman, Oklahoma, out here on the southern plains of the North American continent. Where Iranian studies is growing and thriving. Thank you for visiting us. We're actually going to talk to Lior about his recently published first monograph, Between Iran and Zion, Jewish Histories of 20th Century Iran, published by Stanford this year, 2019. Some of you have probably heard of it. It's a book that's already received a great deal of well-deserved attention in the field of Iranian studies and beyond. But before we discuss the book, Lior, can you maybe just begin by saying something about your academic background and your training? You and I have actually known each other for a while, but maybe some of our listeners can get to know a little bit about your academic background.
Sure. So I started my graduate work at UT Austin, down the road from here.
That's right.
Down the I-35. And I worked on Iranian nationalism, the modern Middle East. I came to UT Austin after getting my undergrad and master's degree in Ben Gurion University in Israel.
Right.
And only about halfway through my graduate training, I changed my topic to focus on Iranian Jews in the 20th century.
Interesting. Yeah, I remember that when we had some contact back in your, I guess, early graduate career. OU and UT, we have a sort of an informal back and forth collaboration. So I visited you down there when you were still developing the project.
Right.
And you worked with Kamran. Kamran Agai was your PhD advisor.
Correct, yeah.
I kind of think of UT as kind of the way maybe UCLA's Iranian Studies program was in the 80s and 90s. There was a whole big group of us that came out of the Nikki Keddie School of Iranian Studies at UCLA. And I think UT is kind of continuing that tradition a little bit.
Yeah, there's a very robust Iranian studies program at UT in terms of language training and history and literature and every aspect of Iranian culture that can be and should be part of the academic training is there. So
definitely, especially within the discipline of history.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of one of the things that really jumps out at your book that makes it part of this tradition that I'm really familiar with is that you are really grounded in the discipline of history, and you're contributing to a historical understanding of modern Iran within the discipline of history.
I certainly should hope so.
Well, I mean, as well as Jewish studies too, and we'll talk about that. Let's actually discuss the content and the thesis of the book. If you were to encapsulate the book's principal argument, how would you kind of encapsulate that?
So it follows up on what you just said. I think that the biggest, if I have to encapsulate it in one sentence, it would be Iranian Jews were part of the Iranian society,
Right.
which is something that doesn't necessarily come across when you come from from the field of Iranian history or from Jewish studies. Both overlook or ignore the existence of minorities
That's true.
in the Iranian sphere, and also in the terms of when you come from the Jewish studies angle, there is this tendency to look at the Jewish community everywhere, but especially in the Middle East and in Iran, as a group that lives in a bubble and is very isolated from the surrounding environment. And what I hope that is the biggest contribution of my book is that this understanding that Iranian Jews were Iranian.
Yeah.
They were part of the Iranian society. They interacted with the Iranian society, with the non-Jewish Iranian society. They interacted with other minorities. They lived full, well-rounded life in Iran.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the book really captures that very well. I remember when I was first developing a syllabus for my modern Iran class, and I was committed to including something about the history of Iran's Jewish community on the syllabus and part of the class. I went to go look for some material, and I was actually frustrated that I couldn't find very much. And the one thing that I found was the Habib Levy book, which you actually discuss in the introduction.
Right.
And it was really kind of my own kind of process of, thinking about how to include Iranian Jewish history in my syllabus, and I came across the same issue that you came up with, is the Habib Levy book. So how would you sort of describe that book and its role?
Let me go back to your first question about my academic trajectory. When I came to UT, I knew that if there's one thing that I'm not going to study, it's history of Iranian Jews. Because because it was so boring. It was made of just pogroms and harassment and this long waiting for Zionist redemption. I said, well, if there's one book, and this is the Habib Levy's book, then probably this is everything that there is to know about Iranian Jews. Otherwise, we would have other materials to work with, right? And I knew that I'm not going to work on Iranian Jews. I'm going to work on the national movement. I'm going to work on Mossadegh.
That's where you were starting.
Yeah.
I remember that.
And then for my very last seminar in grad school, I decided to write. I took a class with Kamran Arai, and this class was on revolutionary ideologies.
Oh yeah.
And I decided to write the paper just to get it out of the system, to write about Jews and the revolution.
Of course.
I said, this is going to, again, just to get it out of my system.
Then you can go back to Mossadegh.
So I can go back to Mossadegh and say that I covered one thing on Iranian Jews. And I said, the rationale was that when you read history of Jews in the Middle East, especially, and this is a field that has done tremendous progress in the past 2 decades. I think that since Joel Beinin wrote his book on the Egyptian Jews, it opened the options for studying Jews in different ways.
And Daniel Sadiq book.
And Daniel Sadiq.
Eventually I assigned a Daniel Sadiq.
Yeah, which is excellent research on 19th century.
19th
right.
century. Yeah.
But I said, when you read the Jews, the history of Jews in the Middle East, Jews were always there. They were part of the national movements. They were part of the social movements. They were of the bourgeoisie and the communists, and they were the poor and the rich. They were diverse as the societies they lived in. And when you read on Iranian Jews, you don't get a sense of diversity. You don't get a sense of community that is made of many individuals or many classes or
Yeah.
and I decided to examine for this seminar paper one aspect of the Jewish community in Tehran during the revolution.
Hmm.
And after this ended up being the seminar on which I worked for the longest time, but it also became my first article on the Sapir Hospital during the revolution, and
Hmm.
I this became my first serious engagement with the book of Habib Levy as to analyze the book itself and the author and the circumstance that led him to write this book and basically to see why the state of the field of Iranian Jewish history is so it's still behind. It's still in 1961 when
Yeah.
Habib Levy wrote this book.
Right.
Um, so this was this made me think that it's about time to get a new assessment of Iranian Jewish history, especially in the 20th century. Habib Levy's book goes from the Babylonian exile 2,700 years ago to 1961.
Hmm.
And Habib Levy was not a historian by training, so you can see the methodological and theoretical flaws in the text. And I thought that it certainly had a role in shaping Iranian Jewish history and identity, and he himself was a very important figure in the community. But it's about time to get a new historical assessment of Iranian Jews.
It reminds me of the larger project of critiquing the historiography of modern Iranian nationalism, and those of us broadly who have been kind of engaged in rethinking how that dominant narrative of Iranian nationalism, where it comes from, and how to unpack it and rewrite it. That seems to be, in a very real sense, part of what your project is also trying to do. I mean, in Iranian nationalism, there's always the story of the pre-Islamic, splendor of ancient Iran, and then the Arab-Muslim conquest and decline, and then the Renaissance and the modern period. And that became the dominant 20th century narrative of Iran. And that was the first stage of rethinking a historiography, is to sort of identify the dominant narrative and then deconstruct it and then begin to rewrite a new one. And that seems to be like really what you're doing from the point of view of the Iranian Jewish narrative.
Yeah, because again, even in the historiographical trends, they were part of the society. They also thought of themselves as, in nationalist terms,
Right.
they were the. It's not rarity to hear Iranian Jews describe themselves as the original Iranians.
Right,
They were
of
there
course.
before Islam came. They are very proud of their Persian heritage. I think that of the Jewish communities of the Middle East, it's probably the one minority, one community that really preserve the culture of Iran.
Mm-hmm.
They still, second and third generation after immigrating out of Iran, they still speak Persian. They celebrate Nowruz. They something very deep inside is committed to the national project of Iran.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how they also tell their story.
But another theme though that comes up in the book is this theme of fluidity of identity.
Right.
And certainly integration and participation in the national project and Iranian identity was a big part of the Jewish experience, that you tell that story. But then you also have this theme of sort of the multiple identities, the fluidity. You could be Iranian, you could be Muslim, you could be Jewish, you could be Israeli, you could be religious, you could be secular, you could be a communist, you could be a nationalist.
All at the same time.
All at the same time.
Yeah.
And all of these things could coexist. It's almost counterintuitive a little bit, but in the story that you're telling, and in a very real way, the way Iranian nationalism as it's lived is a combination of all of these things.
Right. And it becomes counterintuitive when you look at it from Western point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Because traditionally, I mean, and we also have to dismantle a bit the concepts of what communism means in the Middle East, what fascism means in the Middle East, what nationalism in the Iranian context, in Middle Eastern context. And as you said, it allows the Iranian existence allows these multiple identities to exist or to coexist.
Mm-hmm.
And it depends on, so in the 20th century,
Mm-hmm.
when we talk about, for example, the Mossadegh period,
Mm-hmm.
if you were pro Mossadegh, pro oil nationalization, you could be on the spectrum of Jebeheh Meli to Tudeh,
Mm-hmm.
but you still agree that the Shah is the leader of the country and that the monarchy is essential part of Iranian nationalism. It doesn't put you on. It doesn't make you a monarchist,
Right.
but
Right.
but you're still. It's part of your identity. And as a Jewish person in Iran, you could still think that Zionism was a good development,
Right.
and you would consider yourself Zionist
Right.
because of religious obligations of praying to Jerusalem,
Mm-hmm.
and so I mean, and it doesn't contradict your loyalty and devotion to the Iranian nation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it depends a lot about. It depends a lot on the context of when you have to decide on your identities. It depends a lot on the context of what is the current struggle that you're part of.
Right. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it changes from moment to moment depending
Right.
on the
Yeah,
circumstances and the
and
context.
one of my interviewees that I quote in the book, he said that he came to Israel in the 1950s, in the mid 50s, and he thought of himself as a communist, Zionist, Iranian nationalist.
Right.
And in Israel, they told him, you can't be all three. You have to choose, and you may want to choose the Zionist to be your prominent identity. And he didn't understand why.
Mm-hmm.
In Iran, he never had to choose.
Mm-hmm.
Why does he have to choose here? But this is, again, it becomes counterintuitive when you think about it from our day and time. So,
That's right. I think, that fluidity is such a big part of what nationalism is, even though nationalism itself always tells the story of itself as something fixed and immutable.
right, and immemorial.
That's right. But in practice, it's actually much more evolving and fluid
Right.
and situational, if you will. Bringing up the Communist Party, you say the book has a lot to say about the Iranian Communist Party, the Tudeh Party, and the participation of the Iranian Jewish community in the Tudeh Party. Can you
Yeah.
give us a little context of that? That seems to be an important part of your contribution, not only to Iranian Jewish history, but to Iranian history, is to kind of come back to the history of the Tudeh Party, which is still an underdeveloped area in the historiography.
I agree. And I think and I hope that it will get a conversation started on not just the role and the place of the Tudeh Party in the Iranian political system, but also to talk about the meaning of communism in the Middle East. Because communism in the Middle East and in Iran was not about class warfare. It wasn't about workers of the world unite. It was about social justice. It was about countering racism and anti-Semitism, and it was about just getting today we would look at it as social democrats. They wanted living wage, they wanted the right to unionize. But in the Iranian context, and by the way, in Iran and everywhere in the Middle East, the communist parties were the parties of minorities. This is where minorities could feel at home because it lacked this side of homogeneous nationalism. And in Iran, the emergence of the Tudeh Party was in the background of World War II and the
Right.
occupation of the Allies.
The 1940s.
1941, right. And this was time when many big ideologies flourished in the Iranian context. And some of them were Nazi propaganda inspired ideologies, and anti Semitism was a real thing in Iran.
Yeah.
And the Tudeh Party was the only political party in Iran that went against tendencies of anti-Semitism, of radical nationalism, and it was also the only party that allowed Jews to officially, or not just Jews, but minorities, to be officially part of the party, of the membership. And this was a great opportunity. So Jews joined the Tudeh not because of ideological commitment to communism, but because this was the place that protected them, that defended their place in the Iranian society.
I think the way you put it in the book is it made them more Iranian.
Right, yeah. This was the Tudeh party from the very early 40s to at least until the mid 50s, was the most popular party in Iran. So we have to look at it as the party of the majority, right? But also, if minorities want to assimilate and want to become more Iranian, they would follow, and the door is open for them. They would join the party that most Iranians like.
Right. But were they participating as secularized Jews or as religious Jews?
And also, this is another
Right.
misconcept. The Tudeh party was not a secular party per se. In the 1940s, the constitution of the party started with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. You can't get,
That's right.
you can't look at it with secular eyes, right? But so it wasn't about secularism, and it didn't enforce this communist atheism.
Right.
It was many of the participants in the Tudeh party were traditional. They came from clerical families. The leadership of the party was always on the spectrum of religious Marxism, and
exactly.
yeah. So
You always see this, that decade of the 1940s is, I think, so critical in Iran's history. And you see what you're describing for the Iranian Jews, it's similar to Shiite clerical families,
right.
where you have, young Iranians who come from these, pious clerical families. And in the 1940s, at some point, the younger siblings in the family become Tudeh members.
Right. Yeah.
So there's this transition from sort of the religious to the Tudeh, and it's almost seamless, and they're still from the same culture and
And they
identity.
find many ideas in Marxism that they can pack in Islamic package.
That's right.
And this is something that we see all the way through the 1970s and the revolution. And it's something that when you take out of the equation the communist atheism, it
Right.
allows you to see the variety of ideas and approaches to religiosity that existed in the Tudeh.
And I think a social cultural history of Iran in the 1940s is still a topic that is really waiting for someone to really to manage and take hold
Absolutely,
of. And I think
yeah.
hopefully some graduate students will take up that project. Maybe I can ask you about one of the other really fascinating parts of the book is your discussion of the oppositional Iranian intellectuals of the 1960s and their relationship with Israel. And this is also a forgotten story that also you bring back and help us to understand. In some ways, part of what you're arguing in one of the chapters is that the Iranian revolutionary movement ultimately what becomes the 1979 movement was in some ways very much inspired by the Zionist project, which also seems counterintuitive. I mean, am I overstating it, or can you explain how Israel inspired the revolution of 1979 in a positive sense, I suppose?
I would say that we definitely see the early thinkers of the revolution interact in many ways with Israel and Zionism and the Zionist thought, and it's famously Jalal Ahmad and Bani Sadr, who became the first president of Iran, and Khalil Maliki. I mean, these people interacted with Zionism and Zionist thought and leftist Zionist thought for a long time.
Pre 67 mostly.
Pre 67, yeah. And they thought, and especially it goes to Jalal Ahmad, he helped to articulate Zionism as a force of as part of the third worldism.
Right.
Zionism was an anti-colonial movement. It helped to drive the Brits out of the Middle East. And this was a major contribution to Iran, to Iranian thought in the 1950s and 60s. And he himself went to Israel in 1963, and he wrote a travelogue. And in this travelogue, he hailed the way that Israel combined this religious tradition with modern nationalism, and Israel is the example of being bridge between West and East, and I mean, he's not critical of Israel in many ways, but he also sees Israel and the socialist movement in Israel as a model, as a paragon of Middle Eastern socialism.
Yeah.
And he talks about the kibbutz, and he visited with his wife, Simin Daneshvar, in kibbutz Ayelet HaShachar in Israel, and they wrote in the kibbutz guest book that Israel is, that the kibbutz is the solution to many countries, including our own.
Right, that's fascinating. Well, we now have a translation of Jalal Ahmad's book,
Right.
The Israeli Republic,
Yeah,
translated by our colleague
Samuel Thrope. Yeah.
And I've assigned it to some of my students, and it's only recently available. And,
Right.
We usually think of
It's a great translation.
and we usually think of West Toxication, Garb Zadegi, but this is the other Jalal Ahmad book.
And I think that because of Rab Zadegi, when Rab Zadegi positioned Jalal Ahmad as the leading thinker of third worldism, of post-colonial thought. And when he then goes to say that Israel is part of this movement, it gets, and we know that Khamenei tells us that when he was a student in the seminar in Qom, it confused them to see Jalal Ahmad speaking of Israel in those terms. So,
Well, I think that's another really important part of the story that you tell in your book that should also be kind of part of the discussion. Well, maybe we can talk about the Iranian Jewish participation in the 1979 revolution. And, this is another topic where we have a kind of traditional view that the Iran's Jewish community had benefited from the reforms of the Pahlavi monarchy, were loyal to the Shah. So when the Pahlavi project collapsed, the Iranian Jewish community were among those who lost out in the post-revolutionary realignment. But you argue something else.
this is why I titled this chapter "The Unintended Consequences," because they did benefit from the Shah's policies. The Shah tried to integrate them into the society, and they did, to the effect that when the Iranian people took to the streets to protest against the dictatorship of the Shah, they felt part of the Iranian society, to the extent that they went out and protested against the dictatorship of the Shah. So ultimately, it's the best manifestation of the success of the Shah's project.
Right.
And we tend to think of, and this is part of the question of historiography, of the Iranian Jews as non-political, as that they prefer to stay out of politics because it would have been detrimental for them to be part of politics. But we see that in 1979, Jews were on both parts of the revolution. They were part of the revolutionary groups. They collaborated with the leaders of the revolution in Iran. And one of the stories that I like so much is the Jewish hospital, the Sapir Hospital, that during the revolution operated ambulance groups with Ayatollah Talakani that went to locations of demonstrations and picked up wounded protesters to take them for treatment in the Sapir Hospital, so they won't have to go to the state hospitals where the Savak would wait for them. And by the way, many of the leaders of the hospital were not sympathetic to the revolution, and they considered themselves pro-Shah. but for them this was a humanitarian mission.
Mm-hmm.
This was something that they should do as part of the Iranian, as being part of the Iranian society,
Mm-hmm.
and this is to rescue and to make sure that their patients are being treated as they should, and not to put the loyalty to the Shah above the loyalty to the Iranian society.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, the other part of that, of course, is, during the early days of the revolution, it was unclear what direction the revolution was going to take. And part of the story that you tell is the story of the Association of Jewish Iranian Intellectuals, which was something completely new to me.
Right.
And this was an organized group of Iranian Jews who were actually advocating for. I mean, what were they advocating? It wasn't. It was part of the socialist ideal of the early days of the revolution.
Right. So these were the leaders of this group were Tudeh activists,
Mm-hmm.
and they served time in the Shah's prison for their political activism, and they wanted to make sure that the Jewish community would join the revolutionary movement. And in 1978, in March 1978, so full 9 months before the Shah left Iran, they ran in the elections for the leadership of the community and won. So the revolution started in the Jewish community even before it started. And it was a very interesting group of people. Their vision for Iran was creating this democratic society, republic that would broaden the borders of nationalism and include every member of the society. It would fight against imperialism and colonialism and political Zionism, and it would create this Iranian utopia that was in among the. I mean, this was the idea of the revolution, right?
When that's where it began.
Right, and so they took the revolutionary ideals and showed the Jewish community why they should be part of this movement. In the Jewish community, it worked because they won. But later, when the revolution took different directions, this group, I mean, eventually they would become the voice of the community even after the revolution. But they faced many, many challenges because of the outcomes of the revolution.
I mean, and that's, of course, revolutions are always so unpredictable, and they take different courses.
Right.
I mean, we can talk endlessly about all of this, and all of this is really fascinating, and I think that the podcast has only captured a very small part of what's actually in the book. But I really do want to congratulate you, Lior, on the
Thank
book,
you.
and the rethinking of modern Iranian history and all of its areas and dimensions, including the Jewish history of that history. You've done something very iconoclastic, and that's, I think, something that is really important. And I should also say, the book is a very good read. So,
Thank you.
And I was very. I'm one of the few people who read it as a dissertation,
Right.
and as a monograph, and I can tell you it's much improved from a dissertation. So you've done a great job. Thank you for joining us, Lior, on the OU Iranian Studies podcast.
Thank you for having me again.
Thank you. Our hope is to continue with these conversations between OU Iranian Studies faculty and visiting scholars who join us here at the University of Oklahoma's Farzaneh Center. So thank you for listening, and until next time, goodbye.